So the structural steel can be used as a grounding electrode conductor to extend it to electrode, or it could be a conductor that allows you to extend to other electrodes and tie them all together. That is perfectly allowed to do that. Okay? That's not a problem at all. So, but it's important that you understand that the structural steel is not the electrode. We have a rule for that when we're looking at the different types of electrodes, and that one isn't it. So if you're looking at 250.52, then the electrode that is the in-ground steel, right, that is going to be 250.52A2, and that's called metal in-ground steel. Okay, that's like I-beams that are driven in the earth for at least 10 feet, or they're in concrete encased in earth for 10 feet. That's your electrode. So this metal framing of the building, that's not the electrode. That can be a conductor, or it can be a grounding electrode conductor that's extending to the different electrodes. But it is not in itself considered an electrode. Okay, important to remember that. All right, okay. All right, so let's go back to the lesson. All right, so let's continue on here. So we have a third allowance here that we're looking at. And let me get my code book back up here so I can make sure that I'm here if we need to go to it, just in case. All right, so the third one is rebar itself, the rebar. So let's kind of look at this one. So what does the code say? The requirement says a rebar type concrete encased electrode installed in accordance with 250.52A2. So y'all remember, it has to be either half-inch rebar, okay, 20 feet of it, in the footer or foundation, encased in 2 inches of concrete. It has to be in contact with the earth. Y'all, if you don't understand about electrodes, make sure you watch my 2-hour video over on Fast Trax Tube, where I talk about all the different electrodes. You'll love it. It's a great video, only available to subscribers on Fast Trax Tube. Go check it out. That's our sister platform. That sucker is growing by leaps and bounds. People are loving the video platform. And to me, I'm biased, but I think it's better and has more features than YouTube. I'm just saying. All right. And it's growing, and we got so much more that's going to be on it. In fact, Just Calculations is exclusively on that platform. All right. So let's look at a little more here. So if we have the rebar and it qualifies, let's say that it qualifies. It says, and an additional rebar section extends from its location in the concrete foundation or footer to an accessible location that is not subject to corrosion. Okay, so it's not going to be outside. It's going to be in the interior of the building. Okay, is permitted for the connection of grounding electroconductors and bonding jumpers in accordance with the following. Okay, don't worry. I've got an image. Our grounding and bonding course has some of the best images out there. So don't worry. I'm going to give you a visual here in a second. All right, but let's look at it. So it says the additional rebar section. Okay, so you know you've got the rebar in the footer or foundation. And so what we're talking about is taking a piece of rebar and bringing it up through the sill plate up into the wall. And of course, it has to be accessible. So you're going to have an access that's there, right, to be able to get to it. All right, so that type of thing. In fact, that's what my house has. It's to be able to get to it. All right, so it's extending up. All right, and let's see here. It must be connected to the grounding electrode rebar and connected together by steel tie wires, exothermic welding, or other effective means. So the rebar that comes up has to extend down to the concrete encased electrode that is down in the 2-inch encasement. It has to then be connected to it with tie wires, exothermic welding, normal just welding. It can be done with any other effective means. Check with your AHJ to see what they're acceptable to. Typically, steel tie wires is what people tend to use for these, because that's usually what they use to interconnect the rebar configuration or the grid. Okay. All right. So there you go. Next, the rebar extension. Okay, we're at B now. The rebar extension must not be exposed to contact with the earth without corrosion protection. Okay, so this rebar that we're talking about, that extension that comes up, that's typically going to go down into the encasement and it's going to come up into the wall. So it's going to come up in there. So it's not going to be exposed to contact with the earth, okay? Unless it has some type of corrosion protection. So if that was the case, let's say it's coming out and you make that connection, then it would have to have some type of corrosion protection over top of that connection to protect that rebar and to protect that connection, that type of thing. Okay. I'll remind you, if this extends and it's exposed, then it still has to be accessible, right? But remember, a normal connection to the concrete encased electrode allows you to go down into the footing and actually make a connection. So like a 4-gauge copper could go down and make connection to the rebar, and those connections don't have to be accessible, right? We saw that earlier. But these connections, if you're going to use rebar and extend it up or extend it from the actual concrete encased electrode, then they're going to have to be accessible. And if it's exposed to the earth or in contact with the earth, then guess what happens? You're going to have to put some corrosion protection over all of that connection. Easiest thing to do is don't do that. Bring it up into the wall. Okay. All right. Third, it says, or C, it says the rebar must not be used as a conductor to interconnect the electrodes of the grounding electrode system. So that piece that's poking up, it is only for you to make a connection to that concrete encased electrode. That piece of rebar is not to be used as an interconnection for other electrodes, like we talked about with the water pipe, that 5 feet of water pipe. You're not going to use that little piece to do that, okay? Not going to do that at all.